And we're going to spend most of this hour, the next half hour at least, and more if you decide to call, talking about the Veterans Administration. Why are we going to do that? Well, a couple of callers have challenged us to pay more attention to the scandal. So that's what we're going to do. And specifically, we will dig into the hearing that was just held in front of the House Veterans Affairs Committee. Now, you're not going to see this or hear this on any other broadcast or cable news outlet. And here's why. This is boring, what media types would call boring talking head stuff. TV news execs have a word for this kind of story. It's called a BOPSA, which is an acronym for bunch of people sitting around. News directors are trained from birth to avoid such material on television newscasts. I know, because I was one for 15 years. This is the kind of material no commercial newscast will ever touch in any kind of detail. Now, I also have to confess to you that when we were discussing this last week, I made the statement to one of our callers. I think it may have been Matt, but I'm not sure. I made the statement that inspector generals are mean and nasty, and I'd be inclined to believe them. So if inspector general is saying that, there's nothing to this, I would tend to believe that. A caller challenged me on that, and after listening to this hearing, or at least the parts of it that I did listen to, I may have to admit that I was wrong. I will further admit that being wrong has happened once or twice before in my life. I think I could be wrong about that. But hush, Mark. Now, one of the things that Jim Parisi and I can do for you is break stories down journalistically. Both of us were TV news directors. He does morning drive on PowerTalk 1210. I do afternoons. Now, my goal over the half hour then is to make what otherwise would be a fairly boring, long, tedious news event live and breathe for you. Because a good news talk radio host will do that. So by the end of this presentation, if you hang with me, and I hope you do, actually your blood might be boiling. I say that because mine is. I don't know. Maybe yours won't be. It all depends on whether you care about our veterans. The people who served our country and helped protect liberty. Now, the background is that a few months ago, a whistleblower, Phoenix VA physician by the name of Dr. Samuel Foote, claimed that up to 40 people had died at the Phoenix VA healthcare system, in that system, while waiting for care. And as they were waiting for care, the VA officials were lying about the fact that people were waiting for care. The system's official records, said Dr. Foote, showed its waiting list were meeting goals, but its secret list showed that that was a lie, that veterans who were waiting for care did not show up on the official waiting list. They were on secret lists. The ones for which the executives were awarded performance bonuses were the official lists, the ones that were lying. Now, ultimately, the Office of the Inspector General checked out Foote's allegations, and we'll talk more about how that came about. In his opening statement to the House committee, Acting Inspector General Richard Griffin had to defend his office against criticisms that it had inserted a whitewashing sentence into the final report that wasn't in the draft. Such changes are unusual, we're told, because a draft OIG, Office of the Inspector General, a draft OIG report normally is not changed after it's submitted to various agencies for comment. That's what some of the analysts are telling us. Normally, the only revisions that go into the report after that point are to include comments from those agencies that got a look at the draft, but not this time. And here's the crisis, or here's the controversy. Words were inserted into the final report that were not in the draft report, claiming that the inspectors, after all the work they did digging into all of these cases, could not conclusively assert, quote unquote, could not conclusively assert that any of the deaths of veterans said to have died while waiting for care, that any of those deaths occurred because the veterans were waiting for care and didn't get it. So first thing I'm going to do is we're going to play a lot of clips from this hearing. It's the House Veterans Affairs Committee. And here is Acting Inspector General Richard Griffin describing the controversial sentence that was inserted.
Concerns seem to come from our inclusion of the following sentence in a subsequent draft report that was not in the first draft report we submitted to VA. The sentence reads as follows: while the case reviews in this report document poor quality of care, were unable to conclusively assert that the absence of timely care caused the death of these veterans.
So that's the sentence. They changed it. Went from absence, or basically saying that correlation does not prove causation, is that type of thing, to saying that they could not conclusively assert that the delay in care caused any deaths. So now Mr. Griffin explains why that sentence got changed.
This sentence was inserted for clarity to summarize the results of our clinical case reviews that were performed by our board-certified physicians, whose curricula vitae are an attachment to our testimony.
Okay, so the investigation hadn't changed. The only thing that changed is that they decided for some reason that they needed more clarity. Why the sudden urge to do that? What had been unclear? What sentence did it replace? Let's listen again what got replaced when they changed this sentence. They went from a sentence that had said something else to the sentence that said they couldn't conclusively say that the delays caused the deaths. Here's what they would have said if they hadn't made the change.
It replaced the sentence, "The death of a veteran on a wait list does not demonstrate causality."
Right, that's what I was telling you before. Correlation does not prove causality. So just because someone died and they also happen to be on a wait list does not mean that they died because they were waiting. That was the original sentence, which didn't even tell you whether they had investigated or not. And they changed it with the sentence that after all the investigation, they couldn't conclusively assert that the delays caused the death. Now, I don't know about you, but the original sentence seemed to me to be more clear. Just because someone was on a wait list for care doesn't mean he died for lack of care, right? Got that? Got that. Okay, now, I don't know about you, as I said, but at this point, I'm wanting to know if they looked more closely at the cases to see if they could come up with any facts other than the obvious one that the dead veteran in each case died on a wait list. Specifically, did they die of a disease or disorder for which they were awaiting care? Because that sentence, both the original and the replacement, simply says you can't conclude that from the simple fact that they died, right? So you've got to look at the medical history and so on. Further, that replacement sentence does not say the same thing as the original. The first says you can't conclude from the death alone that the delay caused it. The second says that they weren't able to make any conclusions at all. Why not? Are you saying you did look further? You did look at those case histories? And only after that you were still stumped? Did you see the gap between those two sentences and the differences between them? The first one left off at the death itself. The death doesn't prove causality. The second leaps forward to the end of the supposed investigation and said, after all that work and digging, we didn't find anything conclusive. We couldn't prove that they died because of the delay. Couldn't prove that they didn't. Really? And remember, he said that because remember that he said that, right? Because the next two witnesses are going to stick it in his ear. But let's hear more from Mr. Griffin. Why did you make this change, Mr. Griffin? Because at this point, a lot of people are smelling a rat here.
This change was made by the OIG strictly on our own initiative. Neither the language nor the concept was suggested by anyone at VA to any of my people.
Okay, so there's no rat, says Mr. Griffin. But he still hasn't said why they felt the need to change the line after it was submitted to various agencies, including the VA, for review. Now, if I'm understanding the timeline accurately, the time the original was written, the casework had been completed. The time of the revision, no new facts had come to light. So what changed? Mr. Griffin addressed that.
In the course of our many internal reviews of the content of our draft report, on July 22nd, almost a full week before the draft was sent to the department, one of our senior executives wrote this question. This is key, gentlemen and ladies. And I quote, "Did we identify any deaths attributed to significant delays?" This is on July 22nd. "If we can't attribute any deaths to the wait list problems, we should say so and explain why." So
why wasn't that question raised earlier? Why wasn't it addressed earlier? Who knows? Some guy said, you know what, we didn't really address that, so we need to address that. So they did. And Griffin goes on to say there was nothing unusual about the last-minute change.
This type of deliberation to ensure clarity continued, as it should, after the initial draft was sent to the department.
All right. Now, because Griffin knows that two, not one, but two, count them, two VA doctors are about to blow him up, he takes a moment to defend the integrity of his office. First, he points out that it's put in 6 years of honorable service, it's done dozens of reports that have led to dozens of hearings, and then he says this.
During these same 6 years, our work has been recognized by the IG community with 25 awards for excellence.
Okay, fine. So in summary, the employees at the Office of the Inspector General are swell people, honorable people. They've done good work in the past. They're doing good work now. A draft of the report written after the investigative work was done initially said only that the deaths of the veterans, said only that the death of a veteran does not prove that he died waiting for care. With no new facts on the table, someone changed that to say the investigation could not conclusively assert that any veteran died because he was waiting for care. Big difference. Now, Mr. Griffin said, just a routine change for clarity. Do you buy that? Does it seem reasonable to you that after investigating all those cases, Griffin said they looked into more than 3,000, not just the 40 they were initially told about. After looking at all those cases, they could not make up their minds one way or another about a single case? Now hold that thought, because after the break, we're going to hear what the whistleblowers themselves have to say. Stay with us. All right, we're just going to come straight back with no foolishness, no skits, no music to our discussion about the House Veterans Affairs Committee. It's looking into the Office of the Inspector General's report on the VA scandal, mainly out of Phoenix. Did 40 veterans die there while waiting for care or not? Well, the person who actually made that allegation was a VA system physician in Phoenix named Dr. Samuel Foote. He's one of the whistleblowers. He's the primary whistleblower. If not for him, you would never have known about any of this. He's now retired. At the hearing, he came out charging very hard. His basic point, the Inspector General's report is a whitewash. He begins by laying out his impressive medical credentials and VA experience, and then he starts throwing punches. Let's listen.
While I have views on many aspects of what has come to be known as the VA scandal, I would like to use this statement to comment on what I view as the foot-dragging, downplaying, and frankly inadequacy of the Inspector General's office. This continues in the report issued August 26, 2014, which I fear is designed to minimize the scandal and protect its perpetrators, rather than to provide the truth, along with closure, to the many veterans and families that have been affected by it.
Now, Dr. Foote points out, basically, this was not, when he blew the whistle on this, which would have been last year, this was not his first foray into whistleblowing. In fact, it was his third. He says that VA training requires employees to report fraud and waste and abuse and so on. And he says in 2011, he did that. And he got results that time.
I first did this in February of 2011, which resulted in then-Director Gabriel Perez being placed on leave within 2 weeks of the IG receiving my letter, and a few months later, his resignation in lieu of termination.
Now, Dr. Foote says 2 years later, he complained about someone else and got a far different result.
I sent a second letter to the IG in April 2013, where I made allegations against the Chief of Health Administrative Services, Brad Curry, for creating a hostile workplace, engaging in prohibited personnel actions, and discrimination against certain classes of employees. As far as I can tell, the IG never investigated this complaint.
So now, reading between the lines here, at this point you can guess, we don't know, but you can guess that the VA organization probably has pegged Dr. Foote as a whiner and a complainer, which might help explain the reaction to his next complaint, which was a little bit more serious than somebody's just management style.
In late October of 2013, I sent a third letter to the IG informing them of the existence of a secret waiting list where 10 patients on that list had died while waiting for appointments. I also included additional allegations of prohibited personnel actions by senior staff. Furthermore, I advised them of a second hidden backlog of patients contained in the schedule and appointment with primary care consult lists and that an unknown number of veterans had perished on it.
Well, that's pretty damn serious. We're not talking about just some manager being a butthead. This guy is saying vets are dying and the VA is lying about it. Now, that letter got an electorate response, right? Well, not so much. But the IG's office in San Diego did send a team in December of last year to go take a look. Let's hear from Dr. Foote what he told them.
At that time, I and others told them about the unaddressed schedule and appointment consults and showed them the Northwest Electronic Holding Clinic, which was being used, as were prior holding clinics, to mask the true demand for return patient appointments. We updated them on the secret electronic waiting list summary report showing that 22 patients had been removed from it because they had died.
Wow, very serious. So what happened next? Dr. Foote says he began following up by email to find out what the team is going to do about it. His first email didn't really get a response. They're not telling him where to send information so that he can follow up with patient data.
I sent 4 more emails in early January, again asking if they would like me to fax or mail the patients' names, but I got no response. I also got no response when I advised them that several more veterans had died.
No response. Not even when he wrote and said more veterans had passed away. So what next? Well, he had a decision to make at that point. Whether to escalate the pressure or not. What would you do at this point? Think about it for a second. Because you know what happens to whistleblowers, right? Bad things happen to whistleblowers. At this point, your bosses have shown no enthusiasm to investigating this, even though you're saying people are dying here. Hello? What would you have done? But what he did was he escalated.
Finally, on February 2nd, 2014, out of frustration, with lack of action by the IG, even though we were informing them of more and more deaths, I sent out IG letter number 4 with copies to everyone who I could think of that might be able to help. The only response that I got from the IG was a confirmation that they had received my letter. A friend suggested that I contact the House Veterans Affairs Committee, and there I found the help I needed.
But, even though now he's talking to congressmen, still no action from the Inspector General. So now he has to decide whether to go public.
During this process, I was advised by several people that the only way I could get the IG's office to investigate my allegations was to make them public, which reluctantly I did.
And that is why and how you and I know about this today. So now the gloves really come off, and he says what you're seeing right now are the results of a criminal conspiracy.
In my opinion, this was a conspiracy, possibly criminal, perpetrated by senior Phoenix leaders. Of the many scandalous aspects, from the performance bonuses paid to top administrators for supposedly meeting waiting time goals, to the harassment of employees trying to rectify the situation, to the destruction of documents and electronic records, to the very real harm done to the health of thousands of veterans unable to receive timely medical care, nothing is more scandalous than the fact that 293 veterans died in Phoenix.
We're going to take a break for some state news, and we're going to continue this. Stay with us. All right, we're talking about, this is the Forrest Carr Show, the Bashful Bloviator, and it's now 5:33. We're going to continue our discussion about the VA hearing, VA Affairs hearing for the House on the scandal in Phoenix, where up to 40 veterans were said to have died while waiting for care after their names were placed on a secret waiting list. Man who made that allegation is Dr. Samuel Foote. In the last half hour, we heard him saying that this was the result of a criminal conspiracy, although you wouldn't know it to read the Inspector General's report. In fact, because you wouldn't know it by reading the Inspector General's report, that's evidence that the conspiracy continues.
Yet even now, right here in this report, the Inspector General tries to minimize the damage done and the culpability of those involved by stating that none of the deaths can be conclusively tied to treatment delays.
All right, now, so at this point I'm wondering, and maybe you are too, having said all this, having said the VA and the bosses in Phoenix and all those people were rascally rascals, does he actually have any information showing that the VA report is wrong? Any information showing that treatment delays did cause deaths after the report says that they didn't see any, they can't conclude that did? Does he have any information to the contrary? Oh yeah, he does. Now keep in mind as you hear this that Dr. Foote is not only I mean, he's not just some politician testifying. He's a physician, a trained doctor who's going to be talking to you about medical issues. This guy could have been your doctor. And you certainly hope that as he's talking to you about a medical issue, he knows what he's talking about, right? So here he is in front of Congress as a doctor talking about medical issues pertaining to the death of veterans who expired while on a waiting list.
I have read the report many times, and several things bother me about it. Throughout the case reports, the authors appear to have downplayed facts and minimized the harm. This was absolutely true in cases 6 and 7, where I have direct knowledge. After reading these 2 cases, it leaves me wondering what really happened in all the rest. For example, in case number 29, how could anyone conclude that the death was not related to the delay when a patient who needs an implanted defibrillator to avoid sudden death did not get one in time? And why was a cardiac death case excluded from the IG review?
Now, what you just heard him say is that a patient, a veteran, keep in mind we're talking about a man or a woman here who served our country, helped defend our freedom. A patient needed a defib device to keep that patient from keeling over dead. Patient didn't get it and did keel over and ultimately died about 3 days later from a cardiac event. But the IG report couldn't find any evidence that the delay in getting the device would have prevented the death or contributed to it. Or that the delay contributed to it, I should say. So now the bottom line here is, and listen to this, listen to what he says the bottom line is, and brace yourself for the figures you're about to hear this man talk about.
Adding it up, the IG report states 4,900 veterans were waiting for new patient appointments at the Phoenix VA. 3,500 were not on any official list, and 1,400 were on the non-reporting secret electronic waiting list. 293 of these veterans are now deceased. This vastly exceeds my original allegations that up to 40 veterans may have died while waiting for care.
293 in Phoenix alone. And we know this lying about waiting lists was going on all over the country. Now, keep in mind, the guy who's whistleblowing allowed us to know about this case. This is the guy who's whistleblowing allowed us to know about this case in the first place. This is the guy who found a way to make the Attorney General investigate, or the Inspector General investigate when it was showing no interest in doing so. And now that it has, he basically says its efforts were pretty poor. It's a continued conspiracy. So at this point, panel chairman shut Dr. Foote down. He was 3 minutes past his allotted time. The bottom line, if this guy is right, the IG's report is a whitewash at best, and at worst, it's a cover-up and a damned lie. He is not the only doctor who feels that way. Catherine Mitchell, Dr. Catherine Mitchell, is currently medical director of the Phoenix VA Health Care System's Iraq and Afghanistan Post-Deployment Center. She testified. She says the IG report is a crock. Now, of course, being a professional, and given the fact that she was testifying to a congressional committee, she didn't put it that way. Here's how she did put it.
The OIG was unable to conclusively assert that the absence of timely quality care caused veterans' death. As a physician reading the report, I disagreed. Specifically, in a minimum of 5 cases, I believe there was a very strong actual or potential causal relationship between delayed care or improper care and veteran death.
5 cases. And that's not all. There's more.
In looking at the report, there are 4 cases where there is no cause of death listed. It's unclear to me how a causal relationship may or may not exist if there is no cause of death given.
In other words, how can you say a delay in treatment did not cause a death when you don't know what killed the patient? Well, the obvious answer is you can't. You cannot. And now you know why the report summary line was changed. It doesn't say a delay in treatment did not cause deaths. It only said the investigators can't conclusively assert that they did. But nor did they say that they didn't. So basically, they've spent all that time and effort, and the end result was, I don't know. Now, I like my wording better. Specifically, the report is a crock. So back to those 5 initial cases. Those are cases where, in the professional opinion of this highly trained physician, treatment delays or poor quality care caused or contributed to the death of the patient. Does she have specific examples of why she thinks that? You bet. And as you're listening to this, I again remind you, she is a trained physician who is being paid right now to care for our veterans. If she doesn't know what she's talking about, what does that say about the poor veterans she's treating? I presume she does know what she's talking about. Let's listen to her.
In terms of mental health treatment, there were 8 veterans on the electronic waiting list waiting for primary care who apparently just wanted a mental health referral. 2 of those veterans committed suicide before they got the appointment.
In other words, veterans at risk of suicide, suicidal veterans, waiting for medical health treatment, did not get the treatment and did commit suicide. Those were not treatment delayed deaths in the eyes of the OIG? No, they weren't. She has other examples.
In case number 29, there was a veteran that needed a life-saving medical device implanted under his skin that would immediately shock his heart into a normal rhythm if his heart stopped. The community standard would have been to implant this device immediately. At the VA, he waited 4 months and still did not have an appointment. Unfortunately, the veteran's heart did stop, and without the device, he had to wait precious minutes for the paramedics to arrive to restart it.
The veteran did not recover from the heart attack. The family removed life support about 3 days later. But did the OIG see that as a treatment delay caused death? No. What's that word we were struggling for earlier? Oh, yeah, crock. And that's what Dr. Mitchell goes on to say, only in more professional and courteous terms.
The OIG stated that this device might, quote, might have forestalled death, end quote. It's very apparent that it would have forestalled death because the implantable device is exactly what's used to treat the lethal heart rhythm that he had. He died from complications of prolonged heart stoppage without the device that could have restarted his heart in seconds.
Now, she's not particularly articulate. She's a doctor. She's not a public speaker. It's important that you understand what's happening here, what she's saying. This veteran desperately needed a defibrillation device implanted to prevent heart failure. He did not get it. 4 months he waited. He had a heart attack. He died. So here's the point. If this is not an example of a death caused by a delay in treatment, then what is? Which is kind of the point. They're not going to find it because there's no such thing in their eyes. And that is exactly what this OIG report is telling you. And wait, there is even more.
In case 39, a veteran with multiple risk factors for suicide came to the ER with intense emotional stressors, including being homeless. He was put on psychiatric meds to stabilize him, but he was discharged back to the streets. He committed suicide 24 hours later. The community standard would have been to admit this unstable veteran.
When she says community standard, she's talking about something called a professional standard of care. In other words, the standards of the medical profession call for doctors to follow a certain protocol in cases like this. They were supposed to take certain steps. They did not take them. This veteran, like the last one, did not get that commonly accepted and professionally required standard of care. Surely, the Office of the Inspector General found that to be a death caused by treatment delay, right? Wrong. Dr. Mitchell has words about that.
The OIG admitted that it would have been, quote, a more appropriate management plan, end quote, to admit this patient, but did not draw a connection between inappropriate mental health discharge from an ER and death from suicide within 24 hours.
How nice of the OIG to admit that saving this troubled vet's life would have been a more appropriate action than kicking him out and letting him die by his own hand on the streets. But that's all the OIG has to say about it. And it could not conclusively assert that the bum's rush the VA gave this guy killed him. Again, I have to use the words. What a crock. But wait, there's yet even still more.
Case number 31, he died of metastatic prostate cancer that was not treated during the 7-month period that the VA failed to act on the abnormal lab. While his metastatic prostate cancer could not have been cured, earlier detection would have started the treatment that would have slowed down the progression of the disease significantly. Now
here's what you just heard. A guy gets a lab test for prostate cancer. It comes back positive. The VA does nothing. Nothing. The guy sits and rots for 7 months. Treatment would have prolonged his life. Wouldn't have saved him, but it would have prolonged his life. He got no treatment. But this was not a death caused by lack of treatment. Now, what you're seeing here is the modern way of covering things up. You cover it up right there in the open with full media coverage, with microphones and cameras and TV lights ablaze, with all the facts on the table. You simply write a report that says, yeah, okay, we looked into it. There's nothing to it. Oh, sure, there are hearings. This one went on for more than 6 hours. If you'd like to hear the whole thing, the link to it is on my blog right now, The Bashful Bloviator. But all people are going to remember is the takeaway. The OIG cannot conclusively assert that delays in treatment caused any deaths. Here's what you should take away and remember. Your government is lying to you, and it expects to get away with it. So far, it has done just that. Have you heard of anyone being indicted for all the lies that led to these deaths? Have any physicians lost their licenses? The powers that be are banking on the fact that you will not take the time out of your busy schedule to get all the facts, even though they're all right there for you to have. They're counting on you not sit and listen to that whole long hearing. They're counting on the media, people like me, to do what they've always done. Boil all the talking heads down to 2 or 3 7-second sound bites, and then move on to the really important story of the day. Whatever football player has slapped his wife or kid around, or whatever CEO has kicked a dog in an elevator, those stories. The government knows that very few media outlets will do what you and I just did together. Sit down and really dig through the boring talking head testimony. It's counting on the average citizen's attention span in our busy 21st century society to be about that of a gnat. Now, here's my question for you. Are they wrong to think so? Think about that as the midterm elections approach. The Forrest Carr Show will continue.